thank you so much for joining me today. Like I told you via Instagram, I use a free Zoom, so it cuts us off. So I'm just going to jump into some questions. I'm bad at coming up with things on the spot, so I've written these down here.
Okay, cool.
So, as you are very well aware, you are the author of several books, including your recent novel, Vivienne, which is what I'd love to focus on today. So in late 2024, I began to see this pink hardcover with a bold yellow typeface show up on my social media feeds, almost as if this were sponsored content. Aside from the striking cover art, I remember mentions that either the author, you, or the book were mired in some kind of controversy. I never went down the rabbit hole to discover what had actually happened, as most anything labeled as a literary feud strikes me as the most ridiculous bullshit ever, given how few people care about this stuff to begin with and how little contemporary literature could possibly affect the culture at large, but I can't say I was uninterested. In any case, your book eventually made its way onto my publicist's Instagram feed, and I plainly asked if she thought it was any good. Lydia, my publicist, maybe our publicist, said it was great, gave me a brief description, and facilitated giving me a copy, which I'm now very grateful to have read. And I agree with her. I love the novel. In short, your book, Vivienne, is about three generations of women. The eldest, Vivienne Vauquer, is an artist who is rumored to have killed a woman in the 1970s for having stolen her lover, the real world artist Hans Belmer. At the start of the book, Vivienne is in her 80s and living in rural Pennsylvania with her daughter Valor and granddaughter Vesta. On the horizon, a prestigious group show called Forgotten Women Surrealists has chosen Vivienne's work for inclusion. However, she's soon dropped from the show after social media chatter re-instigates a controversy around her alleged violence, and an open letter from an organization called Coalition for Artistic Harm Reduction calls into question the content of her work, which they claim includes incest, pedophilia, sexual abuse, torture, etc. This does seem to be a direct commentary on the cancel culture of the past decade, but more so the phenomenon of niche arts movements or ideological groups targeting their own elders, more or less sacrificing the people who paved the way for their own success. I know cancel culture has been discussed ad infinitum, and who even knows how relevant this is in 2025, given the increasingly fractured and diffuse political slash ideological landscape. But I'd love to hear what inspired this particular narrative and if it has anything to do with the controversy that's been alluded to in your other press and interviews. And if you don't want to talk about that, that's totally fine. We can move on to other things, but let's start there.
I like the intro. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you're right. There is a kind of like cancel culture thread running through the book, kind of alongside surrealist themes or things that maybe are older and don't have much to do with the cultural moment per se. But I think, yeah, it was like more so interest. I was more so interested in like the engine underneath cancel culture, which seemed in part to be like this expectation or demand that art or a work or a person be like easily digestible and able to fit into particular, I don't know, categories or molds, and which seems just kind of like anathema to thinking and like having a soul and stuff. Um, so I was like trying to get at that, I guess, that with the Coalition for Artistic Harm Reduction, like as though things can be measured and tallied and scored and so this kind of like bizarre violence that they're doing while claiming to be like against harm and whatever that means, harm. It's kind of a buzzword for a while.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, partly, well, it was weird. It was kind of synchronous. I had a very small, kind of ridiculous controversy in the poetry realm, basically simultaneous to me writing this. So it was informing the book, and then it also wasn't. It was kind of a weird, magical coincidence.
So were you writing with this narrative already in mind when that happened? I also love you had a controversy in the poetry world. That seems
I know, it's so stupid. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, are
Yeah.
you open to discussing that at all? What happened, or is it really none
It's
of my
small,
fucking
but
business.
yeah, sure, sure. I'll mention it. I actually wrote about it in Compact magazine like a few years ago, whenever it happened, maybe 2+ years ago. Um, I had a book that was set to come out with like a small poetry press, and then they canceled it like immediately after they put it up on their website because I wouldn't renounce certain people that I had like appeared on podcasts with and had
Got
written
it.
for, like basically like contamination paranoia. And um, yeah, so I thought it was totally nuts. So I wrote a piece about like the kind of larger implications of that move.
Fair enough. Well, if people are interested, I'm sure that's hopefully
Yeah,
somewhat
you can
easy to
Google
find,
it.
or maybe not. But anyway, let's move on to talk about the style of your writing.
Okay.
Um, from what I understand, you've published several books of poetry. Vivienne is your first novel, correct?
Mhm.
In this book, you play with the language of social media, of dreams, of literary prose. Sometimes this is rather straightforward, but you do seem to inject a poetic cadence into a lot of this novel. Revisiting the book, I opened to a random section. On one page, there are several tweets or internet comments on a YouTube video. One of them reads, while at times oddly lovely, the video says nothing. Then in all capitals, the wind keeps screaming. On the page opposite is a passage inferred to have come from the video, wherein Vivienne, the novel's protagonist, speaks in dreamlike abstractions. For example, in the Silver River, I'm a pony, clothesless and roaming. I'd love to hear about a bit about your background in poetry and your thoughts on how this book is structured in regards to its many stylistic and formal shifts throughout.
Good question. Yeah, I mean, the social media lingo and the more kind of straightforwardly poetic sections, I was thinking about kind of, yeah, like rhyming in daily life and how worlds collide, and maybe like accidental poetry happens from YouTube comments or whatever, and even like might resonate with something happening in the protagonist's daily life away from the internet. So I was thinking about these weird little synchronicities.
Are
And
you a very online person?
how do you define very online?
Well, I mean, I
Yeah.
would say the average person under 40 at this point is sort of defaulted in that space. I don't know exactly how old you are, but
I'm
I don't
under
know.
40.
You are
I'm
under 40.
under
You do
40.
have social media accounts. I don't know how much you're on there, but a lot of this book is told in sort of the reaction to Vivienne and her work via people on the internet and
Yeah.
anonymous people mostly on the internet, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think yeah, I mean, I guess we're all kind of online, but I'm interested in this question of like, how do you react to when you're making things and putting them on the internet and people are talking about them, how do you react or not react to that noise?
Sure.
Um, it's interesting because we're sort of like we're in it. We're like tagged in everything now. It's like the space between the artist and the reaction is like nothing. We're like right on top of it. So that can create a kind of I think maybe at times like a kind of interesting harmony or psychedelic vibe, but also it can create a kind of like maybe psychosis almost, or it can drive you nuts if you get too in it. So I think I kind of go back and forth, but like I think I'm very interested in like reading what people say about other people's work and like the chatter and like the kind of back and forth, but I also have to not participate at all. Like I don't I like to also not participate that much, and I don't respond to things, and I don't think I'm like, yeah, part of the discourse. I write about things on my like Substack and stuff, but not usually contemporary things.
Well, let's go back to the root of that question, which has more to do with your background in poetry. How many books of poetry have you
I
written?
don't know. I
Okay,
think four.
you don't know. I like that answer. Um, well, how long, like, how long were you working in poetry? Did you get any education in that, or like what what
Mhm.
is your background, I guess, just as a writer before you got
Yeah.
this book?
Yeah, I did get an MFA in poetry a while ago, and I still write poetry, so I'm still like working on books of poetry and things like that. I think in poetry, even like when I'm writing novels, it's hard to get out of that space, which I guess just means maybe like extra attention to like the line or sound or something. Maybe. I don't know. So yeah, my background is in poetry and kind of continues to be.
What was the impetus to write a novel then?
That's a good question. Well, I think because the character came to me and I was like, I can't write this. And well, maybe I could have attempted to write a book of poetry, but I think I wanted to try to write a novel that kind of actually had a plot and momentum and storyline and also kind of got injected with poetry.
Okay, that's a good answer.
You approve?
Um, I don't want to give away too much of your book, but there is a section at the end that almost reads like a sci-fi epilogue. And I guess if people who are really into plot and narrative don't want to get spoiled here, maybe they can like put fingers in their ears. But I don't know. I don't think it's that kind of book that this really ruins anything. But I'm reminded again of how much this novel plays with form. Similarly to the beginning, you introduce a fictionalized organization, but rather than one aimed to protect people from problematic artists, this Center for Constant Creation aims to, and I quote, deliver productive and purposeful afterlives to those in persistent vegetative states so that their bodies may remain creative and useful long after they've stopped legally living. I can't help but think about this concept in reference to contemporary digital landscapes, wherein it feels like artists are expected to produce constantly or else fall into algorithmic obscurity. And dead or living artists who have had a significant cultural impact are mined by artificial intelligence sorry, until their style is so diffuse or memeified that it's no longer associated with their work, but rather a trending moment online. I'm curious how you view the role of writer or artist in 2025. I've asked this question before in regards to the lack of financial motivation for most writers, but I wonder what the production of creativity means in terms of its usefulness, to steal a term from your novel. Or does that even factor into your thought process when making this work?
Hmm. Well, first of all, I've never had that part of the book like quoted to me, so that was an interesting sensation. It's a weird language at the end. Yeah, there is a kind of leap at the end and a time jump, which upsets people, has upset some people. Okay, the usefulness question. I mean, I think this is part of the cancel culture question or the question of like, yeah, kind of mining artists or writers or like, anything really for utility and production instead of something like, I don't know, uncountable or the sacred or something like poetry that's sort of useless in a sense, but that's precisely why it's essential, and if that makes sense. So, yeah, this kind of using the body and kind of denying death and letting the quote unquote creative process of living go on.
Well, you
So the
just used the word
yeah,
sacred. Sorry, I'll let
yeah,
you.
go ahead, go ahead.
Well, so in sort of dismissing the need for art to have sort of an objective or usefulness, in describing that, you did touch on something with the word sacred. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about that. Is that sort of your approach to like writing this book, or when you sit down to write poetry, or I don't know what other forms you work with?
Hmm. Um, yeah, I mean, I mean, I think of the sacred. I mean, this is a hard question. I guess I think of the sacred as like something that kind of evades grasp or that it has like a feeling or an energy, but it's very, very difficult to nail down. But then like that's the kind of fuel, for writing, like this kind of gap or excess or whatever. So yeah, to try to nail it down or like sort of quantify or make these categories of trigger warnings or whatever it is, feels like the opposite of that. Kind of like forgetting of the sacred, or even like the question of like what a book is about, or what like, I don't know, school of thought it belongs to. I think there's like a time and a place for that. But like while I'm making something, I'm not like thinking about that stuff probably. But then it was also weird. It's not totally true because I'm also going like online and looking, like getting inspiration from like YouTube comments and like very kind of, um, yeah, this other world that's like maybe there are like little nuggets of the sacred within that seemingly profane arena or something.
I like that. I like that concept. Um, okay, well, let's talk about the concept of or the topic of artist once more. As so much of this novel has to do with the idea of the art world and its perception by a more mercurial online audience. What is your relationship to the visual arts or the New York gallery scene, as that's mentioned a lot in the novel, if any at all?
I want to know what you think of the sacred though, too.
What I think of the
Yeah.
sacred? Fine. I guess this is supposed to be a conversation series, not just an interview. I don't tend to answer questions on here, but yeah, I mean, I have said that to people in conversation just casually. I believe writing is sacred, and it is something that is actually I view it as work, as something like going to the gym or whatever that I need to do every day to stay healthy.
Mhm.
But it has so little to do with my financial life or what I consider my career
Mhm.
that I actually have a pretty big distinction and separation. And of course, I, like many people, have little dreams and like, oh, it'd be so great to have a big book deal, or I'd love to get paid more money for this or whatever. And it's not like I don't have any financial benefit from writing. I mean, occasionally I get some money or like royalties or whatever, but meaning that's not the expectation, that's not the motivation. Um, but yeah, it's I guess in a really abstract sense, I could describe it as similar sometimes, not every day, but a practice similar to meditation or prayer that I have to inject myself into a very specific state in which no one else is allowed. And
Mhm.
I think that's very sacred.
Yeah, I like that. Okay. Thanks for answering my question.
Absolutely. If
The
you
New
have
York
any more, go for it.
galleries. Sorry, what?
If you have any more, you can shoot them back at me. But yeah,
Okay,
let's
I
do.
will.
Well, so before you even touch on New York gallery scene, I was just like, this has so much to do with visual arts. You're obviously a writer. You're obviously a poet. Do you do visual arts? Did you start in that world? Is this someone in your surroundings? How do
Yeah.
you have enough? I mean, you can just look at the world and see visual art, but how do you have enough knowledge to be able to talk about that within the context of like an art scene?
Um, yeah, I did make visual art for a while and still do sometimes. And my main like kind of connection with the New York gallery world is I used to write a lot of um review, like, art writing, art criticism, art whatever. So I would go around to galleries and
Got it. How
write.
long were you in New York?
I was in New York for like 10 years, maybe.
Okay. And are you currently in Pennsylvania, like the characters in
Yeah.
the
Like the characters I am in
book?
Pennsylvania. Yeah. So I think that was like a huge, I guess part of, personal part of Vivienne is that there's like the New York parts and the sort of rural Pennsylvania parts. And when I was in New York and writing about these, you know, art shows or just being in that world, um, having come from a place that's not at all in that world and like very much kind of doesn't care about it. It's an interesting like whiplash and also um like very sobering. You know, like you leave New York, people like don't give a shit about some name that is floating around there or some like social capital or whatever, cultural capital. So also, yeah, these different kinds of yeah, capitals, cultural capital and otherwise. And also like the family is very kind of the family in Vivienne is very kind of eccentric and arty, but also very distanced from that scene and kind of like pulled into it in different ways, haphazardly.
Right. Okay. Well, that makes sense. Art critic moved back to you grew up in Pennsylvania?
I did, yeah.
Okay. Well, I've never been there, but anyway, it
You're
sounds
in
lovely and
California.
romantic in the story. Romantic, maybe not, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think
Oh,
it's like I think well, it's in the same way like that maybe we romanticize the place we came from or something, and also the opposite of like kind of the extremes of where we came from and all the weird like associations with home.
this is not a question I wrote down, but just thinking, I was actually watching the book review that just dropped from, I forget his name, but the books are better than food guy, right? Which I really enjoy on occasion.
Yeah, me too.
And he was making a point of how there are these three generations of women in your book, and I've really only mentioned Vivienne as she's the title character, but it's her daughter Valor, correct? Who's
Mhm.
in her 40s or so, I think, for
Yeah.
most of the book, and then she has a daughter who's I forget how old, but let's say around 10 or something like
Yeah,
that.
she's 7.
7, okay, even younger. Is there sort of a intergenerational like womanhood in your family to draw from this, or is that just
That's
an
a good question.
yeah?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, I don't come from a family of artists, but or artistic controversy, but certainly I was thinking about some members of my family and the relationships between women. And one of my great grandmothers was a seamstress, or actually two of my great grandmothers were seamstresses. So I was kind
Okay.
of pulling from that because Vivienne, of course, like kind of quits art and becomes a seamstress. So this idea of like craft or working with one's hands, and then making like art or and what the difference between those things might be. So yeah, certainly pulling from some vibes from my family and little details here and there. No, no one's asked me that. That's a good question.
Well, thank you for sharing. Well, I only have one like written down question, and we'll probably just keep talking after that if you're open to it. But we've already talked about the attacks on artists under the guise of morality,
Mhm.
but you also investigate the flip side of this phenomenon via a character named Lars. This man runs a small gallery and discovers the controversy surrounding Vivienne and her work and offers her a show so as to capitalize on her moment in the proverbial crosshairs. While the sort of cancel culture narrative at the beginning of the book touches on people's eagerness to diminish an artist's work because of alleged behavior, you seem to suggest in your novel that elevating an artist amid or because of their transgressions is equally, if not more, harmful. Put plainly, Vivienne suffers actual violence once celebrated for having been removed from a more traditional gallery's group show. I can't help but think of how my own curiosity was piqued by an air of controversy that surrounded you in your novel when I first saw it mentioned on my social media feed. Do you have any thoughts or opinions, either within the context of your book in regard or in regards to the real world effect of attaching significance to something like controversy?
Hmm. So you read it like the not like the novel suggests that like elevating or like kind of trying to capitalize on the controversy as Lars is doing is kind of equally or more bad than as the opposite, like kind of condemning. Is that right? Is that what
Yeah, sort
yeah.
of. Yeah, I feel like that. I feel like they're kind. That's like a two sides. of maybe the same thing.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm. Yeah.
I notice in myself, I love the contrarian. Like I find that energy really fun. And I don't think that's necessarily bad. But if I'm just to talk about my own opinions here before I ask yours again, often when I look at like political spectrums or things surrounding conversations around art, I have very much sort of disavowed my association with people who want to like dabble in cancel culture or call out people constantly for behavior having to do with work. I think that's really silly. And then I look on the other side, and it's kind of you get sort of drowned in this like edgelord world almost, in which like provocation is the means of what the art is. And I think that also gets boring really quickly. In terms of if that is harmful, I'm not really sure. But there is sort of this thing, this character Lars, at least in the middle of the book, is the way it came across to me is he's a little bit slimy and shitty and just kind of trying to like capitalize on the moment because he knows that's going to sell, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, right. Like as if just because the work gets canceled or there's controversy surrounding a person doesn't mean they're a good writer or
Right.
the work is interesting. I think I agree with you. There is this kind of other thing of like kind of elevating something just because it's apparently controversial or contrarian. Which yeah, it gets boring quickly. There has to be something else. There has to be something else to sustain a thing. And I think that, with the Lars character, um, he's kind of wanting to like get in on the action and make a name for his own gallery in a bigger way by being a bit of a vulture, I guess, but also I read him as kind of he's ambiguous because he's also kind of interested in his own soul and reading the mystics, and I think he kind of really genuinely wants to be a good person, even though he's very caught up in like appearances, and he's also very hungry.
Very
Like
hungry.
physically, he's like he has like a lot of stuff around food. Um, and yeah, I think so. I think it's both for him, and I don't. So yeah, I think he has moments of sliminess, and I also think at the same time, like maybe confronting Vivienne and entering into that world changes him a little bit.
That's fair. And I would like to say to anyone listening to this, I'm not trying to paint your book as an edgelord thing.
Oh
It's
yeah,
very much not. I think this is really stands on its own. I was just
yeah,
reading that portion of the book and being like, well, there was a real thing because like it has a beautiful cover, it's striking. I had a relationship to Lydia who was like, this book rules. And but then I was like, I keep seeing this little shit about you on the internet, and that was a motivation, if I'm to be honest.
yeah. Thanks for your honesty. No, it makes sense. I mean, of course, there's a certain like allure or curiosity. But then I'm glad to hear that you actually liked it, and it wasn't just that there was some weird poetry controversy around me. I guess that's like the kind of test, I guess, if something like stays with you.
Fair enough. Well, I ran out of questions. A lot of people love to talk about themselves for a long time, so I tend to only write like four to five. I am curious because, all right, it says on your website or Instagram or something that you are a professional tarot reader. Is that true?
I'm an astrologer. I read
Oh,
tarot.
sorry. Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
I'm an idiot. I'm a very like, I don't know if I'm a very straight man, but in terms of
Very straight man.
I'm not necessarily, but I'm very straight in terms of if we're going to make the generalization that straight men encounter astrology via women mostly.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. And that is true of my life. However, I've recently befriended a young man runs a press in Los Angeles who gave me my first tarot reading in maybe a decade, and it was actually quite interesting. So, when you say you're astrologer by profession,
I mean, yeah, I guess, yeah, partly. It's one of the things I do.
how
Um,
does that work in terms of a job? I'm sorry, this has nothing to do with my
I
fucking
mean, I
good
see
book, but
clients. I mean, I work mostly with artists, so I end up working with a lot of people, like either long term or semi long term on their work, like sort of using astrology and tarot and divination in the process of like making something.
really,
Yeah, that's like I would say the bulk of what I do, and also teaching.
and teaching. Wait, can you explain to me I know I'm not paying you, so don't like do a session, but I mean like how does that work to facilitate someone's art process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's kind of how I got into it. So that's sort of what I like naturally, I guess what happened is like artists kind of gravitated towards me for that reason. But yeah, we look at their chart, we look at the transits and kind of, astrology is like a language. It's a really kind of weird cosmic generative language. So we use it to kind of think about direct like possible directions their work could take or timing for things, characters. Sometimes we'll do like um charts for characters in a novel or whatever, things like that.
That's cool. Okay. And you teach writing? Something
Yeah,
else?
writing. I don't know. Right now I'm teaching a class on like astrology and psychoanalysis. I kind of just like many things. I invent many different kinds of weird classes.
I love that.
Yeah, it's fun. It's better than teaching in institutions, in my experience.
I would believe so. I would assume it's both more gratifying and I have no idea, but everyone I know who's a teacher is like living in poverty. So hopefully you're doing okay. But
That's really sad. Yeah,
it is
it's
really sad. I
true.
mean,
Yeah.
there are a few have jumped above that, but it seems like everyone just is offered adjunct work these days,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
I
Um,
did that for a bit. I just remember having like a lot of migraines, just
yeah.
like a lot. I mean, it's like I liked the students. It was lovely, but just yeah, a bit much for like not much money at all. Um, yeah.
Well, I'm glad you got out. However, I think it's important students still have access to good writers here and there. So maybe it's like
Yeah.
a rite of passage. People have to like briefly jump in there, ruin their lives. So hopefully some students get something out of it and then
Mhm.
move on to better things.
Yeah.
Um, well, this is the
Do you
worst
have
part.
any other burning questions about Vivienne?
About Vivian, well,
Who was your favorite character? I'll ask you a question.
um, Velour, I think. Velour, because, well, it just might be a matter of association. I feel most closely aligned with her generation and thought process, and she seems to be the one that it has to navigate the logistics around her mother, and obviously while taking care of her daughter. And can we say that she ends up with Lars? That's true, right?
Vesta,
That's
the
it. Wait, hold on a second. Am I fucking up the
in
people?
the time jump. Well, I guess for
Wait,
Ruby.
Vesta is the middle one? Oh, fuck.
No, Valor is Valor is it's a lot of V names. Valor is
Yeah.
Vivian's daughter, and Vesta is Valor's daughter, so Vivian's granddaughter. So Valor's like like Jen.
Okay, well, I meant Velour then. I'm sorry. I totally fucked that up.
But Vesta's the one that ends up with Lars. Spoiler alert. In the time jump, remember?
Yeah, you're right. Okay,
In a bit of a creepy move.
that is a creepy move. But to be fair, Vivian throughout this novel is dating someone like 40 years younger than her, right?
Yes. Lou.
Lou, which is a thing now. I know.
Age gap relationships are trending.
Yeah. Especially with the men and older women. This is like I've noticed this in the
Say,
past.
I didn't notice that. Is that
I don't know.
like between younger men and like much older women?
At least in the past 5 to 10 years, I've seen this become a way bigger thing, and
Hmm.
probably more in urban
In
environments.
urban, yeah, I'm not seeing it around rural
Yeah,
so much, but
it
what do
might.
you attribute that to?
Well, men are broke and also have, I think men don't mature very quickly. So maybe we want some, I don't know. Also, I think just in a real, I mean, that's a kind of jokey way, but I think, there's a lot of reasons for this. Also, I think women for like probably the first time ever in the past, let's say 20 years, have gotten to a point where they are in very powerful financial positions and um are just in promoted in the culture to like look hot as fuck as they age. I don't know. I mean, this is sort of like
Mhm.
and have permission, I guess, to engage in that kind of relationship. I don't know. Do you
Yeah,
date
there was just
younger
the
men?
Nicole Kidman movie with the
Yeah.
like much older than him. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah, I mean, I was like in Vivienne, the age gaps, I was kind of thinking about this sort of like these two languages or two worlds that these like different age gap people might be inhabiting and how they kind of like negotiate that or like kind almost like little analogs of the internet versus online versus offline thing question.
Interesting. Okay. So you don't see this as like a trending, I mean, you
I mean,
mentioned
I definitely think it's a thing. Yeah, it's like trend.
okay.
And even it happens in the comments in Vivienne. There's like a
Right.
relationship with YouTube commenters that is developing. Um,
Do you
but yeah, I mean, I think it's both. It's probably, I mean, it's always been a thing,
You're right. I'm sure it's always been a thing, but I think traditionally we think of the opposite, right?
certainly.
Do you date men? Is that, can I ask that? You can also tell me fuck off.
Do I date men? I'm married to a
You're
man.
married to a man. He's younger or older.
He's the same age as me.
That's, I think that's the way it should go.
Totally normal.
That's very normal. All right. Well, we have 2 minutes left.
Yeah,
I really recommend your book, Vivian, and I don't know.
thank you.
Do you want to say anything else? Pitch your next thing, a book of poetry, a class.
Well,
Hey,
no, I don't want to pitch anything, but Vivienne in paperback is coming out at the end of June. So people should get that. Because I think
brilliant.
paperbacks are pretty cool, right? Do
I do think they're cool. I've mostly only published in paperback. I want a fucking hardcover. I had a translation of this
you
card.
not have a hardcover?
I have one book that was, I have one that was translated into German as a hardcover, but no, none of my
Oh,
US novels. So I think it's very cool that you have a hardcover. But yeah, if you have a
okay,
paperback
fair
too,
enough.
great.
Yeah, that's what's coming out June.
You think it's cooler to have a paperback?
Mm, I don't know if it's cooler, but I kind of, it's like nice to carry. I like the feel of carrying around a paperback.
It is easier. Okay. It's cheaper too, right?
My dog. It's cheaper. It's kind of like you can throw it around. It's a little more like, yeah, I don't know. It just doesn't feel as precious.
That's fair. Okay, well, we're
I mean,
about to
I'm not
kick
like
off.
anti-hardcover. I'm just like, yo, the paperback's coming out. You guys should buy it.
Fuck yeah. Well, thank you for joining me today. I think this is just going to kick us off here in a second. So it was a
Okay,
pleasure.
thank you.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye.